Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements.
The mainstream media just got caught editing reality, and you'll never guess which side the edit favors. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across our politics and across the internet from an independent perspective. So the big interview that Kamala Harris did with CBS News and 60 Minutes is making a ton of headlines right now, but some pushback is emerging online because of a particularly crazy edit and omission that was made to the final broadcast. In the build-up to the interview, they released some teaser clips, which had certain footage showing Kamala honestly giving a pretty incoherent, word salad, nonsensical answer. But in the final broadcast, they edited her commentary to remove the word salad and make her look better. Take a listen to this clip that shows you the before and the after.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
We're not going to stop pursuing what is necessary for the United States to be clear about where we stand on the need for this war to end.
It is totally normal for 60 Minutes to edit interviews down for conciseness and clarity and length. They don't do live interviews. They don't do full unedited interviews. They do packages that are sliced down, but you're not supposed to cut answers to entirely change them or to remove things that make the politician look bad, especially when one of the main criticisms of Kamala Harris has centered on her coherence or, at times, lack thereof. So what we have here is one of the most popular and widespread institutions in journalism today, CBS News, editing interviews of a presidential candidate to basically cover up their mistakes and shortcomings and make them look much better prepared and more coherent than they actually are. That is not how editing should work, and it's a great example of why people increasingly distrust the mainstream media. And 60 Minutes has made a big deal out of the fact that former President Trump refused to do an interview with them this time around. And look, I think he probably should have done it. I like to see politicians do interviews on the opposite side of the spectrum or with people who will be tough on them. But I have to say, his claim is that they're biased against him, and stuff like this sure does validate that claim. Now, what makes this story so crazy to me is that this comes just days after the same institution, CBS News, which we covered yesterday, basically publicly threw under the bus and shamed one of its hosts for daring to critically and toughly interview an anti-Israel author. They said that his very, I think, aggressive and critical interview violated their editorial standards. So asking tough questions of an ideological activist is a violation of your editorial standards, but cutting up your interviews to make a politician look better isn't? Is that really where we're at with the state of mainstream media? I do have an update on that story, by the way, about the journalist from CBS News who interviewed Ta-Nehisi Coates. We talked about how CBS planned to bring in this DEI grifter, Dr. Donald Grant, but apparently they got so much pushback and ridicule for that they actually canceled that and decided not to bring him in. But unfortunately, this doesn't actually represent CBS seeing the error of their ways and backing their journalist. No, they got rid of that particular plan, but they still forced the journalist in question, Tony DeCouple, to do essentially a struggle session with their anti-racism internal group. Mr. DeCouple met for an hour with members of the CBS News Standards and Practices teams and the in-house Race and Culture Unit, which advises on context, tone, and intention of news programming. The conversation focused on Mr. DeCouple's tone of voice, phrasing, and body language during his interview with Mr. Coates. One of the people said, "You've got to be kidding me. CBS News is actually forcing a reporter who dared to do his job and critically interview a progressive to undergo bizarre struggle sessions with woke people inside the company who are berating him for asking tough questions of a black author. At the same time that their other shows are deceptively editing interviews with presidential candidates to make them look better, and that's not being considered a violation of their editorial standards. Is this a joke? Am I being punked? Is Ashton Kutcher about to pop up and be like, "Punked, you've been punked"? The Gen Zers in my audience won't even know what that's a reference to, and that makes me sad. And it's actually a shame because I thought the CBS News correspondent, Bill Whitaker, who interviewed Kamala Harris on 60 Minutes, actually, in the footage we did see, did a pretty good job. And I imagine the editing wasn't up to him, what aired and how it was spliced. But he pushed back on Kamala a lot and really aired and really revealed that she didn't have a lot of substance behind many of her statements and claims. For example, when he pressed her on how she was going to pay for the trillions of dollars of new spending she wants, she had no real answers and just resorted to empty slogans that don't reflect reality. Take a listen to this clip.
My plan is about saying that when you invest in small businesses, you invest in the middle class, and you strengthen America's economy. Small businesses are part of the backbone of America's economy.
But pardon me, Madam Vice President, the question was, how are you going to pay for it?
Well, one of the things is I'm going to make sure that the richest among us who can afford it pay their fair share in taxes. It is not right that teachers and nurses and firefighters are paying a higher tax rate than billionaires and the biggest corporations. I plan on making that fair.
But we're dealing with the real world here.
But the real world includes...
How are you going to get this through Congress?
You know, when you talk quietly with a lot of folks in Congress, they know exactly what I'm talking about because their constituents know exactly what I'm talking about. Their constituents are those firefighters and teachers and nurses.
I'm sorry, y'all, but this is such bullshit. It's funny because it's just rambling and incoherent, but she's asked, how are you going to pay for your trillions of dollars of new spending and all your new giveaway programs that you want to do? And her answer is, we're going to make the rich pay their fair share. They already do, babe. Look at the numbers. Look at the data. Do the math. You can find individual rich people who exploit loopholes in the tax code to not pay much in taxes. And look, I want to get rid of most of the loopholes and have as flat a tax code as possible. But overall, the idea that teachers and nurses pay higher tax rates than rich people is ludicrous and untethered from the reality of our tax system in this country, which especially at the federal level, but even at all levels of government, is incredibly progressive, meaning that it taxes rich people much more than it does the lower income segment of the population. As the economist Jeremy Horpel pointed out on Twitter, the US already has a progressive tax system, and even center-left groups like the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, when they do an all-in calculation, show that the wealthy pay a much higher combined federal, state, and local effective tax rate in 2024. You can see that the top 1% pay a combined 35% tax rate on average. Meanwhile, the lowest 20% pay a combined 17.1% tax rate on average. When you look at federal taxes specifically, which is all Kamala Harris would have purview over, the disparity is even more extreme. Looking at 2021 data highlighted by the Nonpartisan Tax Foundation, you can see that the upper earning half of taxpayers, the top 50%, paid 97.7% of federal income taxes. The top 1% paid 45.8% of all income taxes. And when you broaden it to include the top 1% to the top 5%, then you're looking at 67% of all federal income taxes paid by the rich. Meanwhile, lower income people pay just a tiny fraction of total federal income taxes. In short, the rich already do pay a vast majority of federal taxes, and there's only so much you could further squeeze that orange before you'd run out of revenue. Heck, even confiscating all the wealth from US billionaires would fund the federal government's current rate of spending for like 8 months. You simply cannot have trillions and trillions of dollars of new spending and giveaways while only paying for it by taxing the rich. This is delusional fantasy land. And look, I don't expect the average person to be familiar with all this tax data, but somebody who's the vice president of the United States and a former senator should be. So she's either incredibly ignorant of the facts of our federal tax system, which is itself an issue, or she knows these facts and is just lying. It's just using a trite talking point to mislead the public, when in reality, she is planning on piling either tons of debt or tons of new taxes on the middle class to pay for this all, and she's just lying to us to obtain power. Either way, it's really not good. But I will give CBS credit and Bill Whitaker credit for actually pressing her on this and revealing the emptiness of her sloganeering and talking points. And heck, if they could just do more of that and less of the deceptive stuff, I think a lot of more people would tune in and trust their political coverage. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Remember, I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely read it on tomorrow's show. Now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slugs.
Today, this trans activist TikToker is lecturing people for not being good allies because they use the slogan, "Love is love." Let's take a listen. And thanks to a listener who pointed this TikTok out to me, because I'm actually blocked by this person, so I don't think I would have otherwise seen it.
If you have used the term "love is love" this Pride Month or ever, please watch this video. Now, while this phrase is a beautiful and divinely true sentiment, I want you to reconsider its use as a catch-all phrase for LGBTQIA+ rights. Love is love comes from campaigns for marriage equality. It addresses the fact that all people deserve to love who they love. So it's widely used to express acceptance of all sexualities. But I don't feel this adequately expresses acceptance for trans and non-binary people. Because gender identity is not about who we love. It's about loving who we are.
Y'all, there's so much more to this video, but I just have to say one thing quick. For these trans activist types, the concept that not everything is about them is so alien. Like, they cannot imagine that people would not make every single thing about them and their identities and their perspective and what's important to them. Babe, it's not about you. Not everything is about you. The world does not revolve around non-binary people. People are allowed to have slogans or talking points that don't always specifically name and include you and your pet project and identity, especially when that pet project includes nonsensical and incoherent things like non-binary. Now, I have my own issues with the term "love is love." I think it's a little too broad, but I guess love between consensual adults is love. Doesn't have the same quite ring to it, but I think I would like to clarify that before I would ever use that slogan. But again, I'm just struck by the narcissism behind these kinds of TikToks, making these petty complaints about word choice.
Under my videos speaking towards my experience as a trans person, I've noticed a lot of folks in my comments replying "love is love," or even referring to Pride Month as gay pride. This harkens back to a vast history of trans people being pushed to the side in the Pride movement.
Oh my God. How oppressed can you really be? How many real problems must you have in your life if you're actually taking the time out of your day to nitpick the phraseology that people use to support you in your comment section? You gotta be kidding me. You gotta give me a break. Now, the next part of this video is where we get into my favorite genre of TikTok content, crackhead history.
While trans and gender nonconforming women and people of color like Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, Miss Major, and many more were pivotal in organizing for LGBTQ+ rights during the Stonewall Uprising, a lot of cisgender people in our community, specifically gay men, were against trans inclusion in the movement because they felt that it would hold them back.
And so here, this trans activist has just repeated the fake history, the woke mythology that you hear a lot from people in the TQ+ activist crowd. The Stonewall Uprising and that brought about the gay rights movement, or at least kicked it into full steam, was not, in fact, led by trans women of color. The crowd that kicked off this riot and uprising was, almost although not exclusively, white gay men. The claims made here about these individuals like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera are not true. Marsha P. wasn't at the Stonewall riot until 2 a.m., late in the night when everything important had already kicked off. It's constantly said that Marsha threw the first brick at Stonewall, but that is mythology, not history. Marsha was also a drag queen, not a transgender person, and it's not clear that Marsha ever identified as transgender. Sylvia Rivera was also not there when the Stonewall riot kicked off, and actually did not identify as transgender until much later in life. At the time, Sylvia was simply a gay man. Miss Major does appear to have been there when the riot actually kicked off, so at least a little bit of accuracy to that one, but wasn't a major leader in the uprising. All of this is woke mythology, or as I prefer to call it, crackhead history. But that's not surprising. Coming from the alphabet people, from the Wi-Fi password community, they've been doing this and spreading this nonsense for years.
A lot of cisgender people in our community, specifically gay men, were against trans inclusion in the movement because they felt that it would hold them back. And this still happens today within a huge community of folks who identify as LGB without the T. And in 2007, L and G rights leaders were willing to sacrifice protections for trans people in the 2007 Employment Non-Discrimination Act for the sake of gaining their own. This just shows how society was and is more ready to accept homosexuality before trans existence.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, that perspective that gay rights would be dragged down by the trans movement has kind of aged well. We've seen that play out in recent years, particularly as the trans movement has gone into radical territory, like advocating for biological males in women's sports or for kids doing irreversible transitions and treatments. And this complaint about the gay rights activists in 2007 who were willing to sacrifice protections for trans people, they were just being pragmatic. They thought they could get protections for sexual orientation passed into anti-discrimination law, but they thought if they included gender identity as well, they couldn't get it passed. That's just how politics works. It's piecemeal activism, taking what you can get. It's not representative of some horrific thing against the trans community. It's just being pragmatic. Something is better than nothing. And yes, my dear, homosexuality is more easily acceptable than transgenderism to many people, particularly as transgenderism has gone beyond the traditional cases of people with rare instances of gender dysphoria who just want to live as the opposite sex and gone into this territory of imaginary fake things like non-binary identity. Homosexuality is much more reasonable and coherent at the conceptual level and doesn't require anybody else to give up something, to redefine how they view sex and gender or give up their single-sex spaces or sports or other things. So of course it's more readily acceptable to more people. That's just common sense.
This exclusion, both within and without the LGBTQIA+ community, is a big reason why us trans folks are still fighting for our rights today. With now 597 anti-trans bills circling the United States, 42 have passed.
I mean, look, that's a scary sounding statistic, and if they were actually horrific bills targeting trans people, I'd be upset about that. But they get that fake number by counting legislation that restricts women's sports to people born biologically female as an anti-trans rights bill, by counting legislation that requires you to be of a certain age before doing irreversible changes to your body, by counting that as an anti-trans bill. So these statistics are meaningless because they include things that are just common sense, not inherently bigoted or hateful.
So I challenge you to consider the implications of the verbiage you are using. Do not let us trans folks fade into the background of your support and allyship. Don't just say love is love. Say love is love and protect trans lives. Then take action accordingly.
I challenge you to get thicker skin and stop nitpicking word choice and maybe find something real and serious to talk about. But that's just too much to ask, I guess.
And if you do not know how, you can sign up for my trans allyship video course at the link in my bio. Society consistently uplifts those who have the closest proximity to privilege. A pride parade is not just a big party, it is a march. We need to focus our Pride Month on lifting up those who need our support the most. As Marsha said, no pride for some of us without liberation for all of us. So let's get to it. I love you.
I gotta be honest, I don't love you. I'm not a big fan of your content, to be honest. The love is not mutual here, babe. I love how when you get to the end of one of these woke rants, there's always some sort of grift attached. And now, after this long diatribe explaining how you're problematic for something incredibly minor and irrelevant, you, if you still don't fully follow, can pay me money to educate you. Guys, didn't you know we can discover the heart of allyship for just $49.99? We can embark upon a self-reflective approach to trans and non-binary support with a 5-part video workshop series guaranteed to help you build a deeper connection with your allyship to the trans and non-binary community. Oh boy. Guys, maybe I should low-key sign up for this and then live stream it. Let me know what you think. If you'd be interested in watching me take this course and educate myself better, let me know in the comments. I can't really handle any more of this TikTok stuff in one day without incurring permanent brain damage, so do hit that like button to reward my suffering. And now I'll read a few of your comments from the last episode to wrap up today's show. One person writes, I love the way Shoe on Head, who's a leftist YouTuber, responded the last time the woke left tried to cancel her. She said, and I quote, I'm not sorry, I haven't learned my lesson, and I will do it again. Yeah, I love that. I'll repeat that if I get canceled. I'm not sorry, I will do it again, and I haven't learned my lesson. I love it. Another person says, so now asking questions that you don't like is trauma? What would these people do if they went through a real traumatic experience? Yeah, I find the woke safetyism and their use of trauma to refer to anything that hurts their fifis really offensive. As somebody who's experienced real serious trauma, who's known people who've experienced real serious trauma, it just is insulting to their experience and the actual concerns they have, the way that some people, at least on the left, just invoke trauma and throw that word around like candy and Halloween. They're doing a lot to delegitimize people's actually traumatic experiences when they do that. And I don't think that's okay. Another person says, my advice to the animal mom would be to lean into it. Oh, you're actually a dog? Okay, honey, I support you. Later, bad girl, get off the furniture. She'll stop playing real quick. You know, I worry that if I have kids one day, to rebel, they're all going to identify as non-binary in theory or whatever they think will just trigger me the most. So maybe I'll have to keep these techniques in mind. Another person commented, CBS really should have taken a page from the Dunder Mifflin HR binder and had Mr. Brown come in to teach them that anyone can be a HERO if they have honesty, empathy, respect, and open-mindedness. You know, I don't remember that episode of Office, so maybe I'm missing the reference here. Another person commented, whenever I see that TikTok of that woman ranting about how football is racist and evil, oh yeah, we covered that on the show, it makes me think that she really doesn't think this, and in reality her man is just in the other room not giving her attention because he's busy watching the NFL playoffs. This person adds, me and my boyfriend love your content. We're happy that there are other reasonable gay men out there like us. Yeah, there are more people in the gay community or the LGBT category that are not in line with the woke stuff and the woke nonsense, and they reach out to me and send me messages all the time. I just wish people would get more vocal so it wouldn't be so lonely out here for those of us who are. Another person says, sending this as a request to never sing or play that gosh darn awful propaganda song again. Please keep up the great commentary. Otherwise, your videos make my afternoons more bearable and often give me some great laughs. Thanks for what you do, Brad. Yes, thank you. And I won't play the Kamala song again anytime soon. But maybe I'll have to go back to that channel one day to find another cringe song to cover. All right, everybody, that's it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet, and do hit that like button before you go. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcast platform, please do take a second to rate and review the show, and do consider sharing it with somebody you know who might like it. That's one of the number one ways that podcasts grow, and I'm really hoping to grow the audio side more. We already are doing pretty well here on YouTube, but I really want to grow the audio side as well, so please do that for me. And with all that, we'll talk again tomorrow.